The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by real.good.ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Welcome back to the Boss Hole Chronicles, everyone. Everybody out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation, it is so good to have you here. We're very excited. I'm always excited about this because I get to do these podcasts with my amazing and wonderful friend and business partner, Sarah Best. It is so good to see you. How are you doing today?
John, I'm great. And I think today we are elevating the podcast to a whole new caliber and level. I'm really thrilled to be here. Good stuff ahead.
No question. We are entering a new, the stratosphere as far as the Boss Hole Chronicles are concerned. Let's not delay this any further. Please tell us about our special subject matter expert today.
I am so happy to tell you about our guest today. First, let me just welcome you, Aaron Dignan. Welcome to the Boss Hole Chronicles podcast.
Thanks for having me. I was excited to meet you all and find out about this.
Well, the work you're doing is amazing and incredible. Let me just tell our listeners a little bit about you, if I may. And I'm just going to read right from this information I have here. It's pretty profound. Everywhere he looks, Aaron Dignan sees the same phenomenon. Our most trusted and important institutions, business, healthcare, government, philanthropy, and beyond, are struggling. Indeed, they are. They're confronted with the fact that the scale and bureaucracy that once made them strong are liabilities in an era of constant change. For the past 10 years, Aaron, you have studied organizations and teams with a new way of working that prioritizes adaptivity and autonomy over efficiency and control. I know that is either groundbreaking to some or music to others' ears as they listen to this. You contend that teams everywhere need to join in the future, this new future of work. In fact, the book you wrote in 2019, Brave New Work, so simple to follow. The instruction and the data that you provide is so groundbreaking. You are the founder of The Ready. Let me tell our listeners that The Ready is a global organizational transformation and coaching practice. So you help companies of all sizes adopt new forms of self-organization and dynamic teaming. So I had the chance to hear you firsthand a few months back. And so these words are resonating deeply with me. And you gave so many examples, as you do in the book, about what we mean by self-organization and dynamic teaming. Your clients include Johnson & Johnson, Charles Schwab, Kaplan, Microsoft, Citibank, Boeing, Macy's, MailChimp, Airbnb, New York Public Radio, Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, Dropbox. We could go on. And also, you're the founder of this amazing SaaS startup. And by the way, for our listeners who don't know what SaaS means, it's software as a service. So you're the founder of Murmur. You first told us about this a few months ago. I'm amazed and really excited to have you share this with our listeners, that you help teams improve through the magic of working agreements. This platform allows teams to connect and define the ways in which they share and do their work. There's so much we have to dig into with that. You also are the co-host of Brave New Work podcast. And I was looking on there today I've listened to your podcast, but the topics that you're covering in this podcast are relevant for any organization that is struggling in the ways in which we described earlier here in your introduction, which is retention, engagement, bottom line results, ability to innovate, you name it. We're all struggling and for the same reasons. Aaron, thank you so much for giving us your time today and for sharing your expertise with us.
I'm so happy to do it. And I want to thank everyone for listening to all that. It's probably it's too much intro, but it does maybe help set the table.
Well, let's start with Murmur, if that's okay, because you shared this a little bit more about it when we were in Boston. We had a chance to talk. Set the stage for us. Give us some context of Murmur and what that is all about.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing I've realized building businesses, I think I'm on my 5th or 6th now, and working with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, is that scaling culture is really, really hard. It is hard to take what is special and interesting and distinct about a group of people when you're 5 or 10 or 15 people, and preserve that magic and that lightning in a bottle when you are 1,000 or 1,500 or 15,000.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons for that is that, the way we show up to work, the way we work, the company itself really is just a collection of agreements. It's a collection of implicit and explicit agreements, things that we have said are true and are written down somewhere, and things that we just sort of know as the social storytelling of the firm. Like, this is who we are, this is how we work, this is what makes us us, right? But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of systems in place right now to actually make those agreements. We don't have systems in place to make decisions, and we certainly don't have systems in place to do those things together. So when I tell folks that one of the keys to creating a culture of agreements, a culture that is highly adaptive and fulfilling and meaningful and connected, one of those keys is being able to let everyone have a voice in how they work together. It sounds great. Everybody sort of wears the t-shirt, but nobody knows how to actually do that day to day. How do you give everyone a voice without slowing down, without becoming a bureaucracy, without dying in consensus theater or whatever can happen when we try to include too many people? Most management experts would say, no, let's make sure that we're all just going fast, and that, leaders are making decisive, critical decisions, and we're all just following in their footsteps. And I actually feel like there's a third way here, and that's what Murmur is all about. So what it represents is a system for making agreements together with your colleagues. Could be in your team that you work with most, could be across teams, could be across individuals, but making working agreements about everything from policies to processes to norms to your purpose, your principles, the meetings that you hold, the roles that you hold, the charters for the teams that you operate. All those things are agreements, and they can be documented in Murmur. And importantly, Murmur allows you to make an asynchronous or a decision without a meeting together in the tool by going through what we call the Murmur method, which is basically just a consent-based decision-making approach that has been proven over the last 50 to 60 years to be a really great way to operate a self-managing or a self-organizing system.
You've given us some great context. So, like any entrepreneur, you have this moment, and take us back to that moment, or when Murmur really started to take shape for you.
Yeah.
Up here, I'm pointing to my head, but it's actually
Sure.
Aaron's head, from that point, and how it sort of hit this genesis and then move forward.
Well, it's funny. The idea has been in my head for close to a decade.
Okay.
We have been talking about having a place on the web to share how we work, colleagues and I, for years and years and years, right? There's a GitHub for code. Everybody shares their code and forks and branches and advises each other on their code, but there's no GitHub for how we work. There's no GitHub for decisions. There's no GitHub for working agreements. I think that's weird. In 2022. And so we've always longed for that, but it has not felt like the right moment for a different way of thinking about that. It felt like maybe the market wasn't quite there, and it was, too fringe an idea. And then 2020 rolled around, and there were, 4 to 5 billion people suddenly doing remote work overnight. And there was a great resignation, and there was a lift in, DEI topics at work. And there was a Web3 movement and an ownership economy and crypto happening. And suddenly I was like, this looks like the wave I was waiting for.
This is the event. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a real gross dissatisfaction with the work status quo. And I think there's an openness now, a different kind of openness to trying something new. So that was a piece of it. And then candidly, the other piece of it was that I was trapped at home for the first time in years. I mean, I was on a plane every week doing speeches all over the world and really engaging with teams all over the world. And suddenly I was trapped at home. So I actually started about 4 or 5 different new projects when I was in this room during 2020. And this was the one that really caught. But I was in a be creative to stay sane mode.
Right.
Thank God for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scaling culture is hard. We have all kinds of data about our employees. And what we don't have is a way to highlight and magnify how we work, or to even profile, let's come together, or let's share the unique and different ways in which, it's the voice you're talking about.
Oh yeah. Well, that's my favorite question, right? As you introduce this idea to a team or a group, and they're like, that sounds interesting, but I think we kind of have all that figured out. And so I'm like, great, let me sit with your team for 5 minutes. Who thinks they have total clarity on the roles that they hold and the decision rights they have in those roles? No hands go up. Who thinks they understand all the major processes in this team or this company around how we hire, how we fire, how we make decisions, how we allocate resources? No hands go up. Maybe there's room for some agreements.
Yeah.
Like we're not nearly as clear as we could be.
And as Sarah says, we are all about objective data. I mean, whether it's engagement data, behavioral leadership, DNA, psychological safety. I mean, at Real Good Ventures, we have, 3 or 4 platforms on which we base our work on gathering objective data. But one of the things that we always would get back on engagement work was, you just said it, decision rights. What voice do I have? What input do I have? And while that was really valuable feedback from an engagement assessment, nobody could figure out, how do we actually make that happen? What's the vehicle or the channel? And it sounds like Murmur is how you make that happen. That's how it actually takes on a life of its own, so that people can contribute and do have that input on decisions and just the direction of the organization.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of my friends in the field, Ted Rao, has a book entitled Who Decides Who Decides. And what I like about that is that there are a series of core decisions that you make when you start any human institution, a business being one of them. And that's where it starts, right? It's like, what is our decision-making approach going to look like? And what I like about starting with consent, which is the way Murmur works, is that it just says whoever's already around the table needs to agree that it's safe to try to proceed as we are proposing. And what's cool about that is that you can start with just that simple idea and say, great, let's build some infrastructure then. I think John should have the right to decide when the podcast goes live. Do we all agree that's safe to try? Yes. So now we've consented to a non-consent decision space for John. We've given John the right to just make that call whenever, that role that he holds wants to. And that was an actual agreement we made, but we made it with consent. And so it's like the glue, it's the foundational kind of Lincoln logs of a governance infrastructure to just say, we're going to start with who's around the table. We're going to make decisions with consent. We'll create the structure that the company sits upon and the decision spaces and decision rights and roles that hold those. And then we have the ability to steer continuously because all those things exist, because it's very, very hard to do a V2 of a book you haven't written yet. All right. But if I have an agreement that says John holds the podcast role and John decides when the podcast goes live, now we can iterate it if we decide that that's not the best way anymore. Now we have a shared piece of property. And that to me is the big jumping off point for consent-based governance and using a tool like Murmur is let's build with building blocks. And then now we have something we can look at. And Murmur has, I think, close to 60 agreements now. The Ready has almost 100. Our entire operating infrastructure is there for anyone to see.
That's incredible. You can almost feel the clarity and what that clarity would provide for people. You could feel the space open up.
Yeah, totally.
As far as freedom and activity, this is pretty cool. So that's a real practical example. Aaron, would you be willing to share other examples of how, Murmur has created that opening or that clearing and that clarity to boost engagement, to boost fulfillment? Where have you seen it? Like, what has it done?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It actually, in some ways, is a mirror for what's going on. So if you roll out something like this to a team that is unhealthy, you may notice that they don't contribute as much. They don't participate as much. Maybe they don't feel safe to propose new agreements or to propose changes to agreements. So the activity in the system tells a story. And the story is like, something isn't right here. And what's cool about watching the product is, as you lean into that, as we all do, I mean, even Murmur, the company, has had periods where it's like, Aaron's the only one writing agreements right now. But we know that, and we can tune into it and say, why is that? Well, is it because we don't have enough time? Is it because we're feeling too much pressure? Is it because we don't feel safe? Is it because we don't feel it's our place? And by diagnosing those things, you get these resurgences. And so right now we're in a big resurgence in Murmur where people are writing a lot of changes and proposals that are, some of which are quite provocative. And to me, that's like the sign of success is I see someone who would be, completely marginalized in a traditional system, provoking and promoting an idea that is like core org design for the company. That's a thing you don't really see anywhere else. So I think it's noticing the lack of that, but then also when you do see that behavior, really encouraging it and really leaning in and saying like, this is This is what we want to see more of, because we need the whole system learning and thinking in order for it to be maximally adaptive. I don't know everything. I can't know everything. I can't see everything. I know that. So when there's a little bit of humility at the top, you realize you need everyone else engaged. And the cool thing about making agreements is engagement is actually measurable, not just in I feel engaged, but actually when someone makes a proposed decision, I ask questions, I offer suggestions, I object or consent, I make proposals of my own. Those are behaviors that we can measure and actually track right down to the individual and say, this team has a lot of equal participation and that team doesn't.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So that's, one way to help managers stay out of the boss hole zone. I mean, really, so this is, I'm just in all practical terms, if we're an organization that's using Murmur, this becomes a place I am on my computer. It's a piece of software that is constant, correct? I mean, it is, there's a flow to it, but if I'm really kind of rooted in those traditional ways, I may have been trained in it, and I've got to believe that using it is pretty easy. I can't imagine you would create something that isn't very easy and approachable. That's got to speak back to the manager. I mean, if I'm not willing to really open myself up and encourage my people to do this, I may just be living in the boss hole zone and stifling that kind of activity and that kind of decision-making and communication.
Well, and that's the one principle the product holds that is kind of an opinion that you can't get around, which is when you invite people to the table to make a decision or review a proposal,
right,
to become an agreement, everybody has equal footing in Murmur that you choose to invite. So if you're of the mindset of like, I want to hear everyone's opinion, then I'm going to decide. That's not a Murmur decision.
Right.
And there's no way to do that in Murmur right now. And that's okay. I think if you already have the decision right from a role that you've been given to do something, knock yourself out. Like there are plenty of roles I hold. There are plenty of roles I hold where I like seek advice or don't and do whatever the hell I want. But I got those rights legitimately from the team. Yes. And from my my circles that I participate in. What I think is challenging for leaders sometimes is they look at the system and they're like, yeah, but how do I override? How do I force something to happen? And the point I try to make is it's not that you can't stop something terrible from happening, because you can in Murmur. You can object and say, this is not safe to try as it currently is written, but so can everyone else. So everyone has that, that ability to object. What nobody has the ability to do is to force. And so I think that's a trade-off, and there are real trade-offs inside that I think leaders will accept or deny. But in my case, the legitimacy that gives the group and the collective buy-in that creates far outweighs any mandate requirements that I might have. And in fact, the more people trust into a system like that, the more they listen to the people who have believability and mastery and expertise in certain situations, because it's not a performative followership, it's a reputational one. Mm-hmm. So when I say to the group today, hey, I'm considering this fundraising decision and I'm kind of leaning this way, do you all feel like you want full consent on that? And the team goes, yeah, we trust you. It's because they know they have the right to not trust me if they don't want to. Right. And so there's a reputational reality there that I find far more enlivening. I would rather be air quotes in charge because I have a reputation, a trusted reputation, than because I have the right hat or the right, shoulder hardware on my military vest.
Right.
Well, and that speaks to the humility you mentioned earlier, which I think about vulnerability. Leaders who are willing to say, I don't have all the answers. It's not up to me entirely. Look at all these amazing people around me. So Aaron, what happens when there isn't consent?
I was just going to ask. I'm thinking of a couple of CEOs that if you were to present this to them, and the level of accountability associated with this is like, I don't like that. Mm-hmm. So back to Sarah's point.
So first of all, let's say we've chosen a decision space that we do choose to share. So no individual role has the right to take action, which is not every decision, right? So if I look at a stack of all the decision spaces that we have inside our company, 50% are probably just anybody can do it, take out the trash, decide to use their card to buy lunch. Maybe 30% are decisions that are held by roles with or without advice. And maybe 20% or 10% even are collective decisions that we've said, no, this sits in the collaborative space. This is not going to be decided by an individual. And so if, let's say we're talking about one of those types of decisions, for example, and someone has an objection, they're going to say, I object in the system. And the first thing the system's going to do is ask them to think about why they're objecting. Are you objecting because this is going to cause harm or because you prefer it would be different? That's interesting. I prefer it would be different. Well, the system will say, objections really should be about like, this is going to move us away from our aim, away from our purpose. It's going to do harm. Let's say you choose harm. Is the harm going to be now or in the future? In the future. Okay, so now you're predicting things. How good are human beings at predicting things? Are you sure? And then, it's going to cause harm now. Cool. Is the harm reversible or irreversible? Can we steer once we see the harm, or do we have to actually, like, is it going to devastate us? And none of those things are going to prevent someone from objecting, but they are thought exercises to be like, why am I doing? Am I being pedantic here, or do I have something that is really important?
Legitimate, yeah.
Yeah, and if I have something legitimate, by the way, it is fantastic to object. Objecting is caring for the system's purpose. It is caring for the safety of the home, but it needs to be somewhat, tested with your own ego and your own reality. So let's say I have a real valid objection. The next thing the system is going to ask me to do is say, can you propose an adjustment to this agreement that would make it safe? So it's not just, it's a no, because I've been in so many committee meetings over the years in big systems, Fortune 100 systems, where people work for 3 months to make a proposal. They bring it in, they trot it out in front of the committee says no, and that's it.
That's right.
What a waste of energy, right? When somebody is sensing something happening in the world at the edge that needs to be responded to. Now, they might be misunderstanding what's going on, but they are sensing something. That's why they're making this proposal. And so by asking the objector to modify it in some way. So for example, let's say the proposal said, I think we should open a Taco Bell in Albany. Taco Bell, folks are like, that's a $2-3 million decision. That seems really dangerous. We don't know if that market's good for us. I just don't feel right about this. This feels like it could be a problem. Okay, what's the counter proposal? I think we should do a pop-up at farmers markets in Albany for 3 months. We just pop up. It's a tent, costs us 10 grand, 50 grand. We get a bunch of market data. Do people come over? Do they buy? Do they ask questions? How does that sound? Now, what's beautiful about that adjustment is the person who proposed Albany is tuning into something in Albany. The person who objected is tuning into the bank account. But by doing the pop-up, they get data on their Albany suspicion, and I get, to save the capex of building out a Taco Bell. Everybody wins, right? We're moving forward. And then if we find that we're overrun at the farmers market and people can't get enough of the tacos or the chalupas, then let's open up, or let's lean in, or let's go bigger, right? But if the data we learn is like, this is a terrible idea, then the person who had that instinct is going to learn something critically important. And that value of that learning to me as a founder is more important than telling them no.
That's right.
I would rather have them be learning by doing rather than learning by listening to my old babble.
I mean, the fact that it just reorders the thinking and calls out what is so standard in the way we meet and discuss and shoot ideas down. As the queen of pedantics and preference, I've come to find out. I love the fact that I would be challenged to really remove just because I like it better this way.
Right.
I have that preference, or that's profound.
I die when I see a typo in the last round of this decision process. And I'm like, is that an objection? Not really.
Well, and there are people in the listening audience who are going, exactly. If you're not going to cross your T's and dot your I's and spell it correctly, if you haven't done your homework, you don't count.
Exactly.
Count.
And I think the important point here is like, look at the early story of any startup and how rough it was. What was important was the one thing that was important, not the rest of it, right? They got the one thing right, and everything else was on fire as they figured out the business. That's true of so many things here, where it's like, yes, it matters to me because of the way I was raised that the punctuation is right. But does it matter to the sensing and responding of the business? No. Like the agreement is just an abstraction of the reality, which is like, we're all saying there's something here. Let's go do something. And let's go learn something. I think that's far more valuable. So I'm working on it. I'm doing my therapy. I'm doing my breathing exercises, but I'm not all the way there yet, Sarah.
And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person. And those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices. Keep the boss holes from driving your talent away. Design your teams for flawless execution and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program. The word learning, you have used it a number of times. And what comes to mind for me, just something we've been working on lately, Aaron, is certification around a psychological safety diagnostic. And this is based on the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard. Just amazing stuff. But it's really interesting because they talk about when you have a team that has a high degree of psychological safety and a high degree of performance accountability, that's when they are actually in the learning zone. And every time I hear you talk about people contributing, challenging, safely challenging, and arriving at and hammering out a better, maybe not hammering out, but at least collaborating to getting to a better solution, whether it's a tent, pop-up tent for tacos or whatever it may be. That's the learning zone, though. And you really, when you think about healthy teams where the leader and the team members feel that interpersonal safety to be able to challenge and share and push against the status quo, that is truly when learning takes place. So
right.
In my head, I'm sort of making that connection to the teams that are really strong and have that safety within them. I think could use Murmur and use it to its fullest extent and pull all the levers in it.
Why it matters so much at a context level that I think folks forget is we come from an age, most of our ways of working come from an age where the job of leadership and management was to ensure perfect execution. Mm-hmm. That was the job. The job is the size 8 shoes always need to be size 8. Cornflakes always need to be crunchy. We were dealing with what I call complicated problems, right? Problems that are predictable, knowable, linear, cause and effect problems. And so the whole way of working was invented around that idea, is that factory model. That was the job. And so, of course, you want to have a kind of a leadership in that context where you're like, this is what's going on. This is the diagnosis. This is the action. But now I would say, 50 to 75% of the economy is focused on creativity and judgment and creating the new and intractable problems like the climate and fixing politics and all kinds of stuff. The economy, none of those systems are cornflakes or size 8 shoes. Those are all complex systems that are highly emergent and adaptive and unlikely to play out the way you expect them to play out. They're going to surprise you. So the only teams that really are successful now are learning teams, because they're dealing with a 3-dimensional chessboard that's constantly changing.
Right.
And so it's just not going to work to apply that old model of like, what does it mean to be consistent every day with a checklist? There is no checklist for most of the missions that I hear from teams when they tell me what they're working on.
What I was thinking is, God, you're so easy to listen to. I just wish people would stop what they're doing and tune in to the doability of this. Like the shift in the mindset is the first part. And then there's things you can be doing. So,
the frustrating part of all of it for me, honestly, is that it's one of those things that's simple to say, hard to do.
Yes.
And so it does sometimes get glazed over, like so much wisdom that you hear when you're in your teens and early 20s, and you're like, yeah, life is short. But then when you really sit with it later, you're like, oh my God, life is short. It is a lot of that kind of stuff. It's these aphorisms that, no, that's very simple. That seems very obvious and intuitive. It is. But then you get, in the Monday meeting and everybody forgets everything and burns the house down.
They go back to their old model.
Yeah.
So, that is what you talked about in Boston and highlighting your book, A Brave New Work. What I thought was just so awesome about that, Aaron, was you give so many examples of the old model versus the new model. Even to Sarah's point, this is not an abandonment necessarily of the old model, but truly a transition from it to the more trust and autonomy, understanding that things are very complex, just as you described them. And we actually believe that in order for organizations to be successful, we have to think about the manager differently. We believe that a reinvention of the role of the manager, it is a different manager than the ones we were cultivating and building and churning out back in the 80s and the 90s, where it was more command and control. And actually, I mean, again, we talked a little bit about this in the pre-discussion before the podcast. I mean, I think we're bearing the fruit is being, we're bearing the fruit now of those 80 and 90 leaders. They were all command and control, and we're wondering why people are leaving their organizations in droves. But then when you hear about those managers and leaders and supervisors that get it and understand this is a people thing, this is a people play, and I got to bring humanity. We have to bring humanity back into the workplace. Those are the ones that are being transformative.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, is it a different manager? Is it no manager? We can debate that. I think.
Right.
No. Go with that. That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Here's what I notice happening at a macro. This is going to be very wonky, but I'm sure some people listening will enjoy it.
Okay.
At a macro level, what I think is happening to work is that all the things that we used to have in monotheistic pillars are being atomized and broken into pieces. And so what you see is, it used to be one handbook. Now it's all these blown out agreements in Murmur. It used to be one manager. Now what we're seeing is actually a manager is a collection of roles, 6, 7, 8 roles. I don't want those roles to go away. I just don't think they all need to be in fill. They can be spread out. And so we can get mentorship one place and set budgets another way. And we can, there are ways to take all the things that we got from the previous system and atomize them and get them in different ways and from different places. And quite frankly, even the idea of leader to me is a misnomer. I don't see leader as a noun. I see leadership as a verb, and I see it as something that people do all the time. And for example, if we're in a conversation about, making a pizza, I'm not a leader. If we're having a conversation about org design, maybe I am. There are people in my organization that step forward when the conversation turns to different topics. As an example, when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion at work, guess who's not the first person that should be standing up on the podium? It's this white guy. And that's fine. That's the beauty of it, right? When you atomize leadership and you atomize management, you get a living system where, the birds in the flying V, it's not the same pattern all the way to Canada. They rotate. And play different positions. And I think same thing for us in different contexts. We have different kinds of leaderships playing roles. In different contexts, we have different role mixes that accomplish those same objectives. Sometimes when I'm trying to plan for the future, I'm doing it by myself. Sometimes I'm asking the team to vote with monopoly money on what they sense and experience in the world around them. So I think that to me is the big shift that's going on, is we keep breaking things down into smaller pieces so that we can get more out of our systems, right? When there's more Legos, you can make a higher resolution piece of artwork. And so the smaller the pieces are, the more we can do.
Well, and so not only have you provided a roadmap and countless examples in the book, Brave New Work, people can actually read the book and begin to understand and frame out how this might be possible, in their own organizations. And you now have a software for people to implement, to begin to really engage people in a different way and to use the voices in a different way. I think it's amazing. Yeah.
And frankly, it's lovely when people use our tools, but that's not, my mission in the world is not just for people to use our tools. My mission in the world is for people to just ask the question, what's stopping us from doing the best work of our lives? And then when they hear the answer, trying an experiment, trying a new agreement, a new alternative way to address that. So it is about just tuning in. There's a section of the book where I talk about how this was all made up. And I think a lot of young people come into the workforce and they just assume, budgets were done by the pharaohs, and the idea of the Gantt chart has been around forever. And we have project management institutes, and that's just the way the world is. It's not the way the world is. We invented all this shit in the last 110 years, all of it. Yeah. And the vast majority of it was invented at or near a factory floor. So you do not have to accept the way things work today as just the, platonic ideal of what work can be. Yeah. I think instead you can just ask yourself, what is serving us and what is not serving us? And that's what I talk a lot about in the book and in the pod, is just paying attention and saying, we deliberately chose the way we work. We did not just inherit it from the bosses, leaders, managers, and media that came before us. Mm-hmm. We did not just watch Devil Wears Prada and go, I guess that's what a boss looks like.
Right.
We actually thought about it and talked about it as a community of human adults and said, this is what we're going to do. Wow. This is how we're going to play the game.
So Aaron, to your point, well, first of all, listeners, as we always do, we're going to put, links for Aaron's book, Murmur,
the podcast,
Ready, the Ready. Yeah. We're going to put it all in the show notes. But for those that are saying, I'm intrigued by Murmur, I mean, what Aaron is talking about is really resonating with me. What would your suggestion be for them just starting to build an understanding of what it offers and what it can do for them?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there are plenty of things that you can read about ways of working, new ways of working that could be useful to you. Certainly Brave New Work is one of them. I think Ted Rao's books are fantastic. I think there are 15,000 other things that can get you started on that journey. In terms of Murmur, you go to murmur.com and sign up for the wait list. Shoot me a DM on Twitter. I'm at Aaron Dignan, and tell me that you did so. And we'll try to get you off that list before the rest of the group gets there, because it is getting pretty long. I think it's 2,300 teams or something like that now.
Wow.
But I think this is a learn by doing game. And so the teams that are having the most success right now are not the ones that are like, oh, I don't know, I'm going to wait until I can see exactly how to do it by the instructions. It's people that are like, I'm just going to throw something out there. I'm going to take something that's going on for us, that's kind of getting stuck in our teeth or getting us debating or getting us talking. And I'm just going to send an idea out to the team in the form of a couple paragraphs and just see what it kicks loose, that they don't hold it so heavily. So I think that's the place to start, is grab an hour with the team, get on a whiteboard, virtual or physical, and just ask the question, where's the tension in the system right now? What's unclear? What is debatable? What is challenging? Let's talk about what that stuff is. Are there things we could try? Yes, great. You go make a proposal about that. You go make a proposal about the other thing. I'll make a proposal about this one, and we'll just try some stuff. Let's get loose. Let's get experimental. That's the key, is not to overgrip, with the knowledge that, and this is the beautiful thing about all agreements done well, in a culture of agreements, if you do something and the next day you realize that was dumb, or that didn't work, or that's illegal, just propose a change.
Right.
Just tell everybody, hey, I just realized something. This is not a good idea anymore. I'm going to propose this change. And then, 5 seconds later, everybody can say, I consent. Sounds good.
Makes sense.
That's why we don't have to wait for the lawyer on Friday when they're out of town. That's why we don't have to wait for the CEO when they're not in town, when they're not present, when they're stuck on the other meeting. We just make decisions. We make commitments. We go. And then if anybody realizes that something's off track at any time, at any level, just propose a change.
Yeah.
That's the big deal.
Sounds a little bit like a roundabout versus a stoplight.
Well, there you go. Yeah. That's one of my favorite metaphors.
It's awesome. Aaron, we can't thank you enough. This has been just so great. And I hope we have you back. I hope when your schedule may allow it, we'd love to have you back in the Boss Hole Chronicles. And like I said, everybody, check the show notes. There will be plenty of links there. But if you can watch Aaron, see him speak, he is absolutely a stellar presenter, and his ideas are so practical, but also just so powerful. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been incredibly ego affirming for me. So I needed it today. And I appreciate it.
Oh,
well, thanks, Aaron. You're a game changer. Keep up the
Likewise.
great work.
Likewise, y'all. We'll see you soon.
Yep. See you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guest today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.